In late February, we were going through a State of the Commoner meta video of sorts. And as part of that discussion, I was talking about how Dash seems to be pretty easy to fatigue, which is why she's not a tier 1 hero. Now, PlaytimeTCG reached out and said, hey, I've actually got a list that's not as easy to fatigue as it historically has been. So through some communications, I was able to get that list and be sharing it with you today. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my flesh and blood friends. Welcome back to the channel for another installment of the Dice Commando video series. It's right coming to you midweek, every week, or so it seems, with the commoner content. Typically deck lists and stuff like that. Now, today we're doing something a little different. We're actually going over a submitted deck list. So PlaytimeTCG reached out and gave us their list. Now, kind of the history on how this whole thing came to be is for a long time, I'd say at least the last year, probably a little more than that, Dash, who used to be one of the best heroes in the format, as things have evolved, other heroes have gotten stronger, Dash became very easy to just kind of fatigue out, right? Many of us have gotten to the point in Commoner where we're just like, all right, I know I'm sitting down versus Dash. I'm just going to block, right? I'm just going to block, and eventually they'll run out of cards. They'll pop their hyperdriver, then they're in a harder spot, and so on. And by pop the hyperdriver, it will go away. You know what I mean, right? Now, so as part of those, kind of that ongoing conversation on the channel, PlaytimeTCG reached out and said, hey, I'd be happy to share my current list with you. It's not as easy to fatigue as they're not saying that it's fatigue proof, but they are saying that what there's a couple innovative things that they're doing that I want to cover. Okay, so one of the first big things that really struck me and why I thought this was cool, there's a couple instances in which they actually don't start with the hyperdriver, but actually start with a boom grenade. And I was like, oh, that's actually pretty inventive, right? That's pretty cool. And you may maybe you have Hadron Collider in there as well. So let's go ahead and pull up the list to share. So there's a couple things here I want to highlight. Okay, so we have Backup Protocol Red, you have Boom Grenade, then you have Hadron Collider, right? So all of a sudden you're like, well, is this person playing the right Dash? This almost looks more like a Dash IO type list. I think that's kind of true in terms of a similar list to Dash IO. But it's very, very, very different from what we've traditionally seen. OG Dash, who is by far the more consistent mechanologist of the two Dashes. Probably of them all, if we're being honest. So let's go ahead and go through this list. So there's one copy of Backup Protocol Red. That's cool. They're using it for like longer matches. Makes sense there. We have two copies of Boom Grenade. The concept of starting with Boom Grenade is very, very interesting in just terms of the total pressure that's being put on, knowing that they can't bleed anything. Because, typically, if you do the math of, right, so let's take a step back, right? If you do the overall math of sitting down and playing against Dash, there are 40 cards in a commoner deck, right? They're actually going to be at 39 because they'll pull one out to start with. Every attack that they throw, well, 2/3 of the attacks roughly that they're going to throw in which they're boosting costs them another card to do that, right? So what that means if removing pistol from the conversation, right? Functionally, that means that they have a maximum of 20 attacks, right? And you could even, so it's, that's probably, that's probably not the right number, right? But my point here is you have 20 health, okay? So if you overall bleed even just 1 health every time they attack, something like that, right? They come in for a 0 to 60. It's okay to take 1, block 3, because they're going to run out of attacks, boost attacks, before you run out of health, right? As a by and large thing, right? The bleed is okay. If they're in a 1/4, you can bleed 1, right? That's, again, not a hard and fast math, but you understand where I'm driving at, right? So they start running out of cards, and you're still in the 6-8 health as long as you're blocking intelligently, right? If you overblock that and then they come for a 2/6, well, now you're in trouble, right? So that's kind of where this shifts a little bit, right? You're obviously using the good stuff, like, if we go through the list, dumpster dive, right? It's a 1/4. You've got the Jumpstart, right? The Jumpstart series makes a lot of sense. The Overload series makes a lot of sense. Actually, they're not on Overload. Sorry, the Crankshaft series, right? So they have Crankshaft as you would expect. So a lot of the basic stuff there, you know, again, your zippers, your zeros, your crankshafts, your jump starts. You do see throttle in there, but throttle is actually a rainbow throttle, which a lot of people have skewed away from. Then we also see some stuff like Big Bertha Blue. And, you know, again, to be clear, the bulk of this list is still a functional fundamental dash list because, like, you know, you play a lot of rainbow arcs of just the best cards, so it makes sense. But I think it's really interesting, going back to the boom grenade point, how it really kind of screws with your opponent, because to my point about, you know, okay, it's a 0, I'll bleed the 1 because I mathematically can bleed the 1. Well, now you really can't, right? So, you know, I don't know that playing 2 boom grenades in a normal dash deck is always the right answer, but I really, really, really like the idea, especially like, you know, if you are in a meta, there's a lot of Phi or something like that, and there's a lot of 2 blocks. That's kind of a really good idea, as opposed to the typical hyperdriver thing, right? And again, playing the hyperdrivers, they can go traditional with this. So I really, really, really think this deck is neat. Now, there is the deck list below, but I made the graphic because I wanted them to have it, and I also kind of want to be able to share it in other places. So, you know, there's nothing in terms of the bulk of the deck. You're seeing a lot of the things you would expect. You're also seeing the red payload. But in terms of what Playtime mentioned, also, if you look at some of the other things that are in here, right? Specifically, Recharge Red. I love that card. I actually play that in mine. But again, it's an over the top, right? And it's very, very, very good. Now, to be clear here, if you're doing that like with Boom Grenade, if you're doing that with Start Boom Grenade, you're not refreshing the Hyperdriver. But it's a really good option there, again, because it makes things harder to block out. But now if you've got the Boom Grenade in there, you do that, you crank it, you keep going, right? Maybe do Boom Grenade from Arsenal is probably the best way to do that in many cases. But you have Rev Up. Okay, that's another big attack card. You have Rev Up Red, Yellow, and Blue, right? So that's something that we don't typically see in your quote-unquote average dash deck. And what they're really trying to do is mess with the overall breakpoints for that very reason, right? It makes them throw more cards, and it makes it harder to then fatigue it out, because what do you have on the back end? Pew, 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 pistol. So I really, really, really like this build. So thank you, Playtime, for sharing this with us. I think it's again, not a huge step away from normal dash, but there's a lot of the little tiny things, and that's flesh and blood, right? A lot of those little tiny things can very much change the way that the deck plays. So anyway, like I said, list is below. Give it some shot, see if it, give it some shots, see if it works for you. And again, everyone, please help me in thanking Playtime for sharing this deck with us and bringing it to us today. So that'll do it today, my commoner friends. Nothing else. Go Commando.